Uh, how are you, sir?
I'm good. How are you doing?
We're doing good. We're doing good. I know you've been doing interviews all day long, and I really appreciate your time. And I really want to get across your policies because your policies are I side with them a lot. So I really a lot of my questions have to do with messaging those policies, um,
Sure.
and and so that if you but I also don't want anybody who's paying attention right now to not know what those policies are. So I'm trying to find a good medium in that balance, if you will. Uh, so if you could, I know you probably said it a million times already today. If you could just, the ones that I think are major are your ideas of, um, well, first off, the environment and how to correct that, and then some of your social policies. If you could briefly go over those, I know they're very in depth. So
Yeah. Well, the core of my platform is what we call the eco-socialist Green New Deal. And the Green New Deal is the Green Party's signature issue or program for the 2010s. I ran on it in 2010s. I ran on it in 2010 for governor of New York. Our presidential candidate, a Green New Deal for America, was her theme in 2012 and 2016. And what we're talking about is an emergency program to convert the economy to 100% clean energy and zero to negative greenhouse gas emissions over the next decade. And we do that by building new production systems, not just for energy production, but for transportation, buildings, agriculture, and manufacturing, so that all the systems are zero to negative greenhouse gases, and also zero waste. So we're not extracting so much out of the earth and putting it back out as waste. And this program cost $27.5 trillion over 10 years, but creates 38 million jobs. And it was developed as a way to deal with the climate emergency. Now we need it to get out of this coronavirus depression and have an economic recovery. And the two parties are dogmatically committed to private enterprise alone to get us out. But the consumer is hammered. If they still have income, they're holding on to it to pay for essentials. So demand is down. Investors won't risk investments to create new jobs. That's the recipe for a depression. And we've already plunged to depression levels. So we need a big public stimulus. So that gets to the, economic justice or social justice part. We've always had an economic bill of rights as our part of our Green New Deal. And that includes the right to a living wage job, an income above poverty, affordable housing, comprehensive health care, lifelong public education, and a secure retirement. And those ought to be things, that ought to be the floor everybody can stand on when they're participating in the economy. And even though we say eco-socialist because we want public energy, public transportation, a big public sector in manufacturing to build this new green machinery, if you have that floor, people will feel freer to go out and bring a new idea to market, take the risk. And they got somewhere to land if it doesn't work out. Right now, I know people that are unloading trucks at UPS, a hard job, because they got health care and a pension at the end. And they'd rather be doing other things, but they're just afraid to take the risk. And some of them got, good ideas, and they're just ashamed. People stay with crappy jobs just to keep the health insurance. So we'd have much more labor flexibility, much more entrepreneurial opportunities for the little people.
So then, those are all sound like great things, and especially if someone's sitting on that one of those great ideas. But as we've seen, people vote against their best interests, more of fear than anything. Fear of economic stability, and then just take the two Democrats and Republicans as we sit right now. Bernie Sanders didn't do well in the primary, mainly because more people were told that he could not beat Trump, and people who are not paying attention close enough they're going to get scared right off the bat. So when you start so obviously they support these policies, but they're too scared to go with the candidate who's willing to push those. And so one of my things, and again, that's the messaging part. How do you overcome that to get the ideas and to make people feel secure enough to vote for that?
Well, you do the best you can on social media, mainstream media, and with your people that have come to your campaign, so they can be your boots on the ground spreading the message. But what we really need is a organized party on the left, so that in working class communities and communities of color and among young people, the people that vote in lower numbers, that predominate among the 100 million people that didn't even vote in 2016 because they didn't like either of them. Right. We won't get past the messaging that said Sanders can't win, you got to go with Biden, unless we're in these communities and people know us, we have relationships with them, they trust us. And so when they get the propaganda through the mass media, we're there to say, well, here's the real deal and here's what you need to look at. For example, even the majority of Biden voters were for Medicare for all. Right. And Biden's opposed to it. And they were just going, we got to get Trump out of there. And we're told that Biden's the best guy. But then there are polls that were showing in matchups that Sanders would do better against Trump than Biden. So, but, unless you're following it closely, you don't know that. Right. But if we had a party on the left that was really rooted in our communities and people knew who we are, they could ask us and they would ask us. The non-voters, people say they're apathetic. In my experience, they're alienated. They're really disgusted with the two major parties. You knock on the door and say, I'm with the Green Party and, we want to do some things in the city, but what do you think? Man, people pour their hearts out. They got lots of grievances, lots of complaints about the two parties. And even if they don't agree with you, they're just happy you gave them the respect to listen. And they'll vote for you just for that reason. Right.
So then you brought up the mainstream media. Now, I think it was either last night or the night before I watched you and Ms. Walker do a question and answer kind of session. I want to say it was from earlier this week or something along those lines. And one of the questions you guys answered was, we're going to give them something interesting to show us, right? Biden's disappeared, Trump is a monster, so we're going to make something interesting. When you have the mainstream media who has a stake in keeping the status quo, how do you get them to pay attention then? I mean, I know you kind of answered that with the idea of boots on the ground, but that mainstream media is a force to be reckoned with at the moment.
Yeah, and building that grassroots party organization is going to take more than just 6 months of a campaign.
Right.
So to get the media's attention, we got to give them stories that, the reporters want to write. There's one we're going to get, and we got a good answer to it, and that is, you're on all these ballots. You're going to spoil the election for Biden. Why are you doing that? And, my answer is no, Biden's spoiling the election because he won't go for a national popular vote using ranked choice voting. And the Greens have been given that proven nonpartisan solution to the Democrats for 20 years, since Ralph Nader ran and the Supreme Court installed Bush. And same thing, Trump is a loser. He lost the 2016 election, the popular vote, and the Electoral College installed him, not the Green Party. So we have answers to that. And so that gets our foot in the door, and then hopefully we can raise other issues. Before this coronavirus, there was a lot of talk about climate change and the Green New Deal.
Right.
I was the first candidate in this country to run on a Green New Deal back in 2010. So that gives me an angle. Don't you want to talk to the original Green New Dealer?
Sure.
Does he think about what the Democrats think? I got something to say. So we give him angles like that. And then, there's stuff comes up in the news, like Charlemagne the God. He's the guy that heard that quote. And then he had an interview with Joy Reid this morning where she asked him, well, what questions were you wanted to ask Biden? Well, Angela Walker and I are answering those questions and sending it to him in an open letter. And, we'll see if some media pick up on that. So, we'll just keep working it and just be in a regular communication. And there will be some reporters we know, they want to cover us because they think we have things to say. And their battle is with their own editors. And that's where, our supporters can help by writing these papers saying, why aren't you covering Hawkins and Walker? MSNBC, why don't you have Hawkins and Walker on? We just got to keep pushing. And, I think we'll do a pretty good job. It'll be we won't be part of the mainstream narrative. That would really be tough because it's, a Biden-Trump race, two major parties. That's kind of baked in the cake. But I think we can get our swipes in here and there, and a lot of people know we're running. And I think we can get a significant vote because Trump is incompetent, Biden's invisible, and this coronavirus health and economic crisis, people are looking for somebody that's got some idea what we really ought to be doing.
Right. So then one of my biggest things that I always talk about is money in politics. As long as we have that, a lot of the things like the Green New Deal, Medicare for all, a lot of those things are going to get ignored because we can't get the support in the parties. Do you have a plan to attempt to get the money out of politics and maybe go to a public financing system?
Yeah, our platform is full public campaign financing, the clean money model that came up in the 1990s and got some traction. We got it in Maine. We got it in Arizona. We got it for judges in North Carolina till the Republicans took over and got rid of it. But and then the Democrats kind of put a roadblock to that because they said, well, it's easier to get matching funds, which really is putting a little public money on top of all that private money. So the way it would work is like in New York now, you raise all the private money you want, but money that's qualified in small donations gets matched 6-1. And you may say, well, that's great, but take a Green running for state assembly raises 10,000 and a Democrat raises 100,000, match it 6-1 of qualified funds. The Greens got 70,000, the Democrats got 700,000. So you increase the difference from 90,000 to what, 630,000? That isn't an improvement. Plus, all the private money's still there. So you just put a little public money to make it look good.
Right.
That's a reform that doesn't reform. So that's one of the distinctions we're trying to make. Let's go back to that clean money model and push that one.
So then I can't remember every single the two Supreme Court rulings in the late 70s that started putting more money into our politics.
Buckley v. Vallejo.
Oh, thank you. As soon as you said it, that sounded that clicked. Yep. And then we also, obviously, this most recently, Citizens United. I'm trying to think of how to answer this. You have this idea that voting for a third party is wasting your vote, or vote for Trump or whatever crap they want to push on us. However, if we do end up with Trump again, and he puts another Supreme Court person on that panel, we may get worse. Would you agree with that? I mean,
Trump's appointee would be a social conservative, and abortion rights would be in trouble. LGBTQ rights might be in trouble. Civil rights certainly in trouble. I mean, the court we got, they got rid of the pre-clearance provision of the Voting Rights Act, which gave the green light to mainly Republicans going around the country, making it harder to vote with these voter ID laws. And plus then they get, Secretary of State positions, and they don't put enough polling places in the Democratic districts, Black districts, working class districts, college students that are more liberal. And but the Supreme Court is political like everything else. They gotta make their rulings in the political climate. So we always have a way to fight back. Yeah, Trump's appointees are gonna be terrible, but the Democrats haven't been that great. In fact, I remember a study from Fordham University back in 2004, and it found that across the board, not just the social issues, but the economic issues, Clinton appointed economically neoliberals, they call them, leave it to the market, don't regulate the corporations, as Democratic appointees. So they were kind of like pro-choice Republicans. And Fordham found that Reagan and Bush 1 appointees were more liberal when you looked at all the decisions than Clinton's appointees. And so, don't get your hopes up too much if Biden gets in there in terms of what the Supreme Court can do. Plus, our strength is in Congress and the presidency because they're elected. I mean, one of our reforms should be term limits for Supreme Court justices. And, the supreme of the three branches of government is the Congress. And, if like on the Voting Rights Act and pre-clearance, Supreme Court struck it down, well, rewrite it another way and put it back in. And, then have a social movement that tells the Supreme Court, we ain't taking no for an answer. If you put all your eggs in the basket of that one thing, the Supreme Court appointee, then the establishment's got you right where they want you, because you're basically surrendering everything else for one issue. And, you really can't fight from that position on all the issues or any of the issues if you're willing to let them box you in like that.
Right. I mean, last time it was, I remember Bush being the monster, Kerry's better than Bush and so on and so forth.
I'm old enough to remember Goldwater was the monster. And Johnson beat him in a landslide. Goldwater was a warmonger. And Johnson got in there and immediately escalated in Vietnam.
Right. It is crazy to hear how each, election we have the boogeyman come about, and then how we get scared on the third party vote. And not only just that, but just the matter of voter shaming between peers. I mean, our citizens between each other. It's interesting how much our lives are being dictated. Again, I would say by media, if not anything. So actually, oh man, one of the main things that came up to me when I was watching some of your interviews and some of your talks, it was the idea of taking over public transportation, like the airlines and stuff like that, and then thinking about this, how they've demonized the word socialism. How do you get? I guess it goes back to the messaging thing. If what you were talking about, taking over transportation, would sound more like socialism, as in what the Nazis did, during World War II, and you used to make, or you have made the World War II statement on our end, how we changed the factories to build for the war effort. So how do we change that perspective as well?
Well, the canard against socialism is that it's oppressive, it's dictatorial, and actually it's democratic. And these corporations we work for are private tyrannies. We don't have any rights when we go in there. In a public enterprise, if it's democratic, and you can have state enterprises that aren't democratic. I mean, Saudi Arabia nationalized their oil company, and that ain't a democracy. Right. So just because it's state-owned don't make it democratic. But the kind of public ownership we're talking about is basically you have locally elected boards. We have transportation authorities now, mostly appointed by politicians indirectly. We can make them directly elected, and then you get a say on who's there, and you make sure they're transparent. So when you're planning your local transportation system, you have a say. And then when you go to larger scale things like high-speed bullet trains we want to build between the cities, that requires, a federation of these local transportation authorities at the state level and the national level. And you've elected representatives to represent you, and you can convey your concerns to them. Right now, if you're talking about Greyhound for busing, or CSX for freight rail, or Amtrak, which is a state, what do they call them, a GSE, or S. Well, it's a state-supported private enterprise, basically. You have no say in any of those things. Right. So the thing about socialism is it's economic democracy. And really, if we're talking about, how big money dominated politics, big money also dominates the economy and how governments are financed. So even if, people think, well, the rich influence politics by paying for political campaigns and lobbyists, but even more, they can defund government finances by, it charging too much interest to borrow money to fund the government. Or cutting off lines of credit, like they did to Dennis Kucinich in the 70s when he wouldn't privatize the municipally owned utility. And so the bank said, we're cutting off your line of credit, and they bankrupted the city. Every city needs a line of credit because your property taxes come in quarterly, and you got a payroll every week and some other expenses. So that's the power they have that isn't up for election. And that's the private power that is very undemocratic and influences the politics. So with concentrated economic power translates into concentrated political power. With democratic socialism, you have a say in the economy. Wealth is more equally distributed or shared. And then when we go to the political realm, we go there as much more as equals. Then as, some people got all this economic power too, which, the government's got to respect, or else they won't even be financed.
And then I know you also have a detailed plan on the Medicare for All. How, I'm pretty sure you addressed this too, but if you wouldn't mind, what is the difference between your Medicare for All plan and, say, the one that Sanders has put forward?
Well, we want to go from national health insurance, where a single public payer pays for all medically necessary services, through a centralized bureaucracy. I'm a Medicare beneficiary now, but I have a little billing dispute with them because you still pay some with Medicare. And I can't even get to the right people because it's a very centralized, remote bureaucracy. What I'm talking about is socializing and democratizing delivery as well as payment for the services. So instead of hospitals competing for customers and maybe accumulating too many MRIs while we don't have any doctors and clinics in the working class neighborhoods, we have a fair distribution because we're going to have elected health boards at the local level. And so the communities that have been neglected can advocate for themselves in that process. And we can ensure we have a rational distribution, so we don't have too many MRIs, but not enough, doctors doing, general practice and looking in on people in their communities. So that's another example where we want a democratic socialism, not just public ownership or a public program where the people using it don't have any say. So that's where we call it a national health service, a community-controlled national health service. A lot of countries have this kind of system where the hospitals and clinics are public, the doctors and nurses and other healthcare workers are salaried public employees. And that's better than what we have now. Now we have fee-for-service. So these hospital organizations, they want their doctors to run through patients as fast as they can so they get more fees, and give them tests and maybe some treatments they don't really need. So that's more fees. And that's not good healthcare. It's, instead of caring for patients, you're maximizing income. That becomes the top priority. And that's a problem with our current system, even if we have single public payer.
Okay, and then I know I'm kind of jumping all over. I just don't want to. I want to get as much in here with the time I have with you.
Sure.
So then some of the questions that I've seen over the last week since I announced that we were going to be interviewing, one is the Second Amendment. If you just quickly go over your policy on that.
I'm fine with law-abiding citizens having pistols, rifles, shotguns within the Heller framework, which says you have a right to those, but the public also has a right to set regulations in the interest of public safety. And then you can argue what those regulations should be, but I think universal background checks is the kind of thing we need. When it comes to military assault weapons, I think we should have a buyback program, get them off the streets. I'm a former Marine, had an M16. Man, you don't want that on the street because somebody who wants to do bad, for whatever reason, they can kill a lot of people too fast. Right. You don't need an M16 to defend yourself or to go hunting.
Right. And then I think the last one I want to really make sure. I'm getting a update from Zoom. The last thing I kind of hit, because I do have a lot of people who watch from the LGBTQ community, is how do you feel about that community and their rights? I mean, I don't want to get into specifics, but just a general kind of any policies for that community.
Well, I think we have to recognize LGBTQIA rights as human rights. We need to pass the Equality Act, which is passed the House. We need to pass it through the Senate and get it signed by the president. And that will end discrimination based on gender identity and sexual orientation. in a whole range of things, from employment to education to housing and so forth. That's the immediate thing on the agenda. And then we need a new tone from the top that respects people for who they are, instead of ridiculing or vilifying, which we get from the president we got right now. So I think the tone means a lot, and people want respect. And I think in this area, the way marriage equality public opinion changed, I've never seen anything change so fast. But you know why I think it did? Is because people started coming out and people realized their own kinfolks were in this community, and they're saying, even Dick Cheney was defending his lesbian daughter there.
Right.
I think that, that's the kind of thing. So I think these are issues that, we made great progress. We still got more progress to make, but definitely we got to hold the line on that, and pushing it forward.
So then the last one that I really want to, what do you need to be on the national stage to be part of the debate between Biden and Trump at the national level?
Well, we're trying to get on all 51 ballots, which will give us a standing with the media and anybody thinking about having debates. We're the only campaign in the country that's going to qualify for federal primary matching funds, which another sort of elevates our campaign as a serious campaign. There is a commission on presidential debates, which sounds like a government agency, but in fact is a private nonprofit that's controlled by the Democrats and Republicans, whose purpose is to keep everybody else out.
Right.
And we've sued them many election cycles, and the courts basically say it's a private corporation, we can't do anything about it. Now that thing was set up in the 90s, and they muscled out the League of Women Voters, which had been hosting the debates with the broadcast networks covering it. And I think we should encourage the League of Women Voters to step up now and say, we're going to reaffirm our role as a nonpartisan civic organization and have a debate with all the candidates who, if they won the states or on the ballot, have enough electoral votes to win the presidency. And what that will mean this year is probably Greens, Libertarians, Democrats, and Republicans. So in terms of the debates, that's, I'm leading in the Green Party primaries. I don't want to count my chickens for their hats. But when it's, if we get to the point where we have the nomination, we're going to start focusing on that and, having a campaign to support the league in doing that. We did that in New York State when Governor Cuomo wouldn't debate us, and the league stepped up, invited all comers. Cuomo didn't show, but the Republican did, along with the other two independents that I did. And broadcast media covered it, but they didn't broadcast it, which was unfortunate. But in this case, and then I have an idea. Trump has said, even the Commission on Presidential Debates, where the Republicans get to veto any moderators, Trump said, I'm not going to participate because I don't trust those moderators, even though he can veto them. So Ralph Nader was saying, I need to get on a horse to get attention. And I'm thinking, well, what do I do? And then I figured it out. I'll ride the horse up to the White House and tell Trump, come out here, you chicken, and debate. So, we're going to try to think of things like that to get attention too.
That sounds awesome. I definitely want to see that. I really appreciate your time. I don't want to take too much more. I know it's almost 9 o'clock your time, I think.
Yeah.
So
day.
Yeah.
There's so much to do.
I can only imagine. If closer to November, if you get the primary and you have time, I would love to do this again to kind of see where you've moved and how things are going, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, I don't mind. I like doing it.
Awesome. Thank you very much again for your time. Please stay safe. Please get those things on the ballot. I'd love to see it here in Nevada. We didn't have Jill Stein last time, so.
Yeah, we got a plan in Nevada. We'll get on in Nevada. Nevada's, you just got to have some people organized. There was a screw up last time, and in fact, maybe sabotage from some Democrats that infiltrated.
That doesn't
that's the story I've heard. They collected signatures or said they were, and then when it came time to collect, bring them to the state, they disappeared, or the dog ate them or something.
That damn dog. Thank you, sir. And
all right.
stay safe.
You too. Take care.
Thank you.